So in this podcast, sponsored by Audio Addict, I'm going to talk to you about Mark Twain. That's actually his pen name. His actual name was Samuel Langhorne Clemens, and I'll get into his life story here shortly. But that's what I'm going to cover on this podcast. I'm going to tell you what I think about him. I'm going to tell you about his life, and then you're going to get to listen to some of his work. Now, one thing about Mark Twain that kind of bugs me is I feel like his storylines are not always easy to follow. I feel like he jumps around a little bit, that it's just not common today. Like someone who's going to be an author today, their storylines are very polished and very cleaned up. So one example is there was in one of his books, there was like a paragraph and a half and it was all one sentence. And I'm just like, no, this needs to be cleaned up. But I guess beside that point, I should also mention I have no credentials in literature whatsoever. So this is just a layman's perspective. I am a writer and an avid reader, obviously, but I'm not a literature scholar. So I know there's a lot of reasons why he's really awesome. I'm just giving you a layman's point of view. That was my own opinion. He's a little bit hard to follow. Some of his sentences get really, really long. But what I love about him is he just has a clever way of kind of stitching words together that, I don't know, it just flows. It just really has a flow. And he also uses a lot of native vernacular to the Missouri area, and I am from Missouri, so of course that's appealing to me. But not a lot of people did that in his day. And so that really made him stand out. You know, he really brought his characters to life, and he does. When you listen to his books, you will see for yourself how he can bring a character to life by using, those slang terms. So that's my opinion. You decide what you think and you let me know in the comments. Now, he was born on November 30th in 1835 in Florida, Missouri. Yes, there's a Florida, Missouri. He was raised in Hannibal, Missouri, and he was the sixth of 7 children. So he was one of the youngest. His dad died when he was 11, and so he actually had to leave school and go to work. And you might think to yourself, wow, how did someone who had to drop out of school when he was 11 become such an amazing writer? And this is why. His brother had a newspaper. It was called the Hannibal Journal. And so he went to work for his brother. And so he was always working with storytelling and these articles and reading. And that's how he developed his love of writing. In his early 20s, he left his brother's newspaper company and he went to become a riverboat pilot on the Mississippi. That's actually how he found his pen name of Mark Twain, because that is actually a riverboat term that means 12 feet or 2 fathoms. And that is how much water you need for a riverboat to safely navigate through. It's called a Mark Twain. After that, he decided to try his hand at gold mining, and so he went to Nevada and California during the gold rush, but that was a failure. It did not turn out good for him, and he was actually a bad investor, evidently. He lost a lot of money investing in something called the page typesetting machine, so I'm assuming it has something to do with newspaper something or other, and it just didn't take off. I'm not quite sure about that. But after the gold rush, he came back and he settled down and became a journalist. And he wrote the book, The Celebrated Jumping Frog of Calaveras County in 1865. And that story was his breakout success. So after that, he kind of gained some popularity and he traveled around through Europe, like just getting to see the world. And when he returned, he met this young lady named Olivia Langdon. He married her. She was the daughter of a coal merchant in Hartford, Connecticut. And so they settled down right there and had kids. Now that's pretty much the good parts of his life, honestly. They had 4 kids. 3 of them died, and here's how that all went down. The first child was a son, and he died when he was 19 months old. And Twain always blamed himself because he thought that illness that ultimately killed him was from a carriage ride they had taken in which the baby Langdon had become chilled. And I'm like, that's a lot of guilt for a parent to carry around. And then his second child was a daughter, and she actually was healthy, grew up, when she was 24 and Twain was actually touring, doing a lecture tour in Europe, she got spinal meningitis and died. Now, his third child, Clara, lived to the age of 88. So she lived a long life. She made up for these other ones, I guess, kind of. You could think of that like that. And then his fourth child was named Jean, and she had epilepsy from the very beginning, and she died of a heart attack at age 29. She did not live with them all the time because she would have to go away for treatment and stuff. So this epilepsy was just something that afflicted her entire life. And then and ultimately brought on that heart attack. After Jean died, it was a few years later, and his wife died. And now, after knowing how much he had suffered through all that, I mean, that was extremely hard for him to deal with all of those deaths. It kind of helps me to understand his biting humor a little bit, because he's kind of snappy. It's like he just couldn't take life seriously anymore after that, and I think that's good. When someone goes through that kind of stuff and can still come out and just find the humor in being a human and all the really stupid things humans do. You know what I mean? But anyway, he is considered the father of American literature. He was witty. He used slang, vernacular speech in his writing. It brought his characters to life. One last thing. He loved cats, and at one time he supposedly had 19 of them. So he was a cat man. And he was friends with Nikola Tesla. I think that's pretty cool. So now, time for you to listen to some Mark Twain books.